The mall was a sea of moving bodies, but Condé moved through it like a ghost through water. He was a pillar of black suit, black tie, black eyes that saw everything and felt nothing. 6 bodyguards formed a human wall around him, their earpieces humming with the quiet business of the Kong syndicate. He didn't look at the storefronts. He didn't look at the people. He only looked at his watch. Time was the only thing he couldn't buy, and he hated wasting it. Beside him, 7-year-old Minna skipped to keep up. She was the only splash of color in his world, wearing a pale pink dress and clutching a silver butterfly locket so tightly her knuckles were white. Condé's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, the only sign that he was a man of flesh and blood. Suddenly, Minna stopped. She didn't just slow down, she froze, her small boots skidding on the polished marble. Her eyes were fixed on the glass railing overlooking the atrium below. "Minna, we are moving," Condé said, his voice like cold silk. He didn't look at her. He was checking a message on his phone. The little girl didn't move. Her breath hitched, a small, jagged sound that cut through the mall's background music. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was small, but it carried a weight that made the nearest bodyguard turn his head. "Daddy, look!" Condé sighed, finally lowering his phone. "I told you, we will get the ice cream after." "No, Daddy! Look!" Minna's voice rose to a shriek, her finger trembling as she pointed across the wide open space of the mall. "My locket! My locket found its sister!" Condé followed the line of her finger. He expected to see a toy store or a shiny trinket. Instead, he saw a girl. She was standing 3 floors down, near a simple food cart. She wore a faded yellow hoodie, and her hair was tied in the exact same braids as Minna's. But it wasn't the clothes that stopped Condé's heart. The girl turned. In her small hand, she held a silver butterfly locket. She raised it to the light, and for a split second, the sun from the skylight hit the silver, blinding Condé. When his vision cleared, he saw her face. It was the same round cheeks. The same wide, curious eyes. The same small mole near the left temple. It was his daughter's face. Condé's phone slipped from his hand, cracking on the marble floor. He didn't even blink. He leaned over the railing, his knuckles turning white as he stared at the impossible duplicate. The King of Silence had finally found something that made him want to scream. The atrium fell into a strange, heavy silence, even though the mall was still loud. It was as if the air had thickened. Below them, the girl in the yellow hoodie felt the weight of their gaze. She looked up. Her eyes met Minna's. For a long moment, their child moved. They were like 2 mirrors facing each other, reflecting a truth that shouldn't exist. "Daddy," Minna whispered, her voice cracking. "That girl, she's me." The crowd began to notice. People stopped walking. They looked up at the man in the expensive suit, then down at the girl by the food cart. Then they looked at Minna. Whispers started like fire in dry grass. "Twins? How?" "Look at the man, he's Condé." The name Khan carried a shadow that made people move back, but curiosity was stronger than fear. The woman standing next to the girl in the yellow hoodie looked up too. She was dressed simply, jeans and a thin sweater, but she stood with a quiet strength. When her eyes met Condé's, she didn't look away. She didn't look scared. She looked confused, then protective. She stepped in front of her daughter, shielding her from the powerful man's stare. Condé didn't wait for the elevator. He turned to his men, his voice returning with a sharp, dangerous edge. "Clear the path. Now." He moved like a storm. He descended the stairs with a speed that left his bodyguards struggling to keep up. Every step felt like he was walking through a dream. He had been told one of his twins died in the fire 7 years ago. He had buried an empty casket. He had lived every day with a hole in his chest that nothing could fill. By the time he reached the ground floor, a circle of people had formed. In the center stood the woman and the girl. Condé broke through the circle, his shadow falling over them. He stood 6 feet tall, a billionaire with the power to crush cities, staring at a woman who looked like she didn't have a cent to her name. The girl in the yellow hoodie peeked out from behind the woman's legs. She held up her locket. It was identical to Minna's, right down to the tiny scratch on the wing. "Who are you?" Condé demanded. The words weren't a question, they were a command. The woman reached back, holding her daughter's hand. She looked at Condé's expensive watch, then at his cold, hard face. She didn't look impressed. She looked tired. "My name is Seo-yoon," she said, her voice steady. "And you are blocking my daughter's light." Condé's eyes narrowed. He was used to people trembling at the sound of his voice. He was used to the world bending to his will. But this woman, Seo-yoon, stood there as if he were just another stranger. He stepped closer, the scent of his expensive cologne clashing with the smell of the fried dough from the nearby cart. "That locket," Condé said, his voice a low growl. "Where did you steal it?" Seo-yoon's face went pale, but her eyes didn't flicker. "I don't steal. I work. And I don't know who you think you are, but you don't talk to me like that. I am the man who owns the air you are breathing." Condé stepped into her personal space. He pointed a finger at the girl in the yellow hoodie. "That child has my daughter's face. She has my daughter's locket. I want to know who paid you to perform this scam." Seo-yoon let out a short, sharp laugh that held no joy. "A scam? You think I planned this? I've lived in a one-room apartment for 7 years raising my daughter alone. I don't know you, and I don't want to know you." She reached down and picked up her daughter, turning to walk away. But Condé's hand shot out, catching her arm. He didn't squeeze, but his grip was like iron. The bodyguards moved in, closing the circle. The crowd gasped. Phones were out now, recording everything. The King of Silence was having a public meltdown. "Let go," Seo-yoon whispered. The girl in her arms started to cry, a small, whimpering sound that pierced Condé's heart. "Not until you tell me the truth," he said. "The truth?" Seo-yoon turned her head, her eyes wet with sudden, angry tears. "The truth is I woke up in the ash of a hospital fire 7 years ago. I didn't know my name. I didn't know my past. All I had was a baby in my arms and this locket. If she has your daughter's face, then maybe you should ask yourself why you left us there to die." Condé's grip loosened. His hand fell to his side. The words hospital fire hit him like a physical blow. He searched her face, looking for a lie, but all he saw was a raw, jagged pain that matched his own. Before he could speak, a flash went off. A reporter had broken through the line. "Mr. Kong! Is this your secret family? Is the rumors of the twin true?" Condé looked at the cameras, then at the woman and the child who looked like a ghost. He knew this would be on every news station in Korea within the hour. He couldn't let them vanish again. "Get them in the car," Condé ordered his men. "Now." "No!" Seo-yoon shouted, pulling back as the bodyguards moved in. "You can't just take us. Someone help!" The mall was in chaos. People were shouting, some trying to get closer for a better video, others moving back in fear of the black-suited men. The bodyguards were professional. They didn't use violence, but they were an unstoppable wall. They guided Seo-yoon and the girl toward the private exit. "Don't hurt them!" Minna cried, catching up to her father and grabbing his jacket. "Daddy, don't be mean to the girl!" Condé looked down at his daughter, then at the girl in the yellow hoodie who was staring at Minna with wide, wet eyes. He felt like his head was splitting in two. He looked at Seo-yoon, who was still struggling against the guards. "I am not hurting them, Minna," Condé said, though his voice sounded hollow. He looked at Seo-yoon. "If you want to protect your daughter, get in the car. If you stay here, the press will tear you apart. Look around." Seo-yoon looked. Dozens of phones were pointed at her. The whispers had turned into a roar. People were shouting her name, asking if she was the hidden mistress. She saw the hunger in the reporter's eyes. She looked at her daughter, who was shaking with fear. She realized she had no choice. She was a small bird caught in a hurricane. "If you touch her," Seo-yoon said, her voice trembling but fierce, "I will kill you." I don't care how much money you have. Kang Dae almost smiled. It was the first time in years someone had threatened him, and meant it. Duly noted. Get in. The black SUV sped away from them all, leaving the chaos behind. Inside, the silence was deafening. Kang Dae sat in the front, staring straight ahead. In the back, the two girls sat side by side, looking at each other in wonder. They were identical, right down to the way they tucked their hair behind their ears. Seo-yoon sat between them, her arms around both girls. She looked at the luxury of the car, the soft leather, the tinted windows, and she felt a deep, biting cold. She was being taken to the lion's den, and she didn't even have a weapon. The car pulled through the massive iron gates of the Kang estate. It was a fortress of stone and glass, perched on a hill overlooking Seoul. As the car stopped, the front door of the mansion opened. A woman stepped out, dressed in a sharp gray hanbok. Her face was perfectly calm, but as her eyes landed on Seo-yoon through the window, her hand twitched, her fingers clutching her sleeve. Madame O stood at the top of the marble stairs like a queen waiting for a messy world to explain itself. She had been the chief of staff for the Kang family for 30 years. She had raised Kang Dae after his mother died. She was the one who kept the secrets, the one who kept the syndicate running when emotions got in the way. As Kang Dae stepped out of the car, he didn't look at her. He went straight to the back door and opened it himself. Seo-yoon stepped out, holding her daughter's hand. Minna followed, rushing to the other girl's side. Madame O, Kang Dae said, his voice flat. Prepare the east wing. They are staying. Madame O didn't move for a long second. Her eyes were fixed on Seo-yoon. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, fear, recognition, or perhaps a deep, dark guilt. It was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a polite, professional smile. Of course, Kang Dae, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes never left Seo-yoon. I will handle everything. It seems the mall incident has already reached the board members. I will tell them this is a misunderstanding. She walked down the stairs, her movements graceful. She stopped in front of Seo-yoon. I am Madame O. Welcome to the Kang estate. I am sure you are very confused. Seo-yoon didn't take the hand Madame O offered. She held her daughter tighter. I'm not confused. I'm waiting for an explanation. And I'm waiting for this man to tell me why his daughter has my daughter's face. Madame O's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned cold. Nature sometimes plays tricks, dear. We must be careful not to let sentimentality crumble the foundation of this family. Kang Dae, we have a syndicate meeting in an hour. You should change. Kang Dae looked at the two girls. They were already walking toward the fountain in the garden, talking in whispers. The meeting can wait. It cannot, Madame O said firmly. The board is nervous. They see a woman from the street and a child who looks like an heir. They see weakness. I did what was necessary 7 years ago to keep this family strong. I will do it again. She turned and walked back into the house. Kang Dae watched her go. He remembered her face the night of the fire, calm and efficient, while he was screaming in the ruins. He had trusted her with his life. Now, he felt a cold shiver down his spine. He realized that Madame O wasn't looking at Seo-yoon like a stranger. She was looking at her like a problem that had refused to stay buried. The night was heavy and still. Kang Dae sat in his darkened office, the only light coming from the glowing monitors on his desk. He was watching the mall security footage for the 100th time. He zoomed in on the moment the two girls saw each other. He zoomed in on Seo-yoon's face. But then he saw it. In the corner of the frame, near the exit of a high-end boutique, a woman was standing. She was partially hidden by a pillar, but her gray hanbok was unmistakable. It was Madame O. The time-stamp showed she had been at the mall 30 minutes before Kang Dae arrived. She hadn't been there for him. She had been watching the food cart. Kang Dae felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He watched the footage again. As Seo-yoon looked up at Kang Dae, the camera caught Madame O's hand. It was trembling. She wasn't surprised to see Seo-yoon. She was terrified that Kang Dae had seen her. A soft knock at the door made him close the video window instantly. "Enter," he said. It was Seo-yoon. She looked small in the massive, mahogany-lined room. She had changed into a simple dress the staff had provided, but she looked uncomfortable in the luxury. "The girls are asleep," she said. She didn't come in, she stood in the doorway, as if ready to run. "Minna gave my daughter her favorite doll. They are so similar, it hurts to watch." Kangdae didn't move. "I saw the footage, Seo-yoon. Madame O was at the mall." Seo-yoon frowned. "Your assistant? Why does that matter?" "She told me she was at the office all afternoon," Kangdae said, his voice a low whisper. "She's been watching you. Maybe for a long time." Seo-yoon stepped into the room, her brow furrowed. "I don't understand. I'm just a street vendor. Why would a woman like her care about me?" Kangdae looked at her, really looked at her. In the dim light, he saw the faint scar on her neck, a jagged line that looked like a burn. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition, a memory of a woman laughing in a garden long ago. But the memory was blurry, like a photo left in the sun. "I think," Kangdae said, "that the fire 7 years ago wasn't an accident. And I think Madame O is the only one who knows why." Before Seo-yoon could respond, the security monitor on the desk beeped. A car was leaving the estate. It was Madame O's private vehicle. She was leaving at 2 a.m. "Stay here," Kangdae said, standing up. "Lock the door." He grabbed his jacket and vanished into the shadows, leaving Seo-yoon alone in the room that smelled of old paper and dangerous secrets. The next morning, the sun hit the Kang estate with a bright, fake cheerfulness. Kangdae walked into the dining room where Seo-yoon was sitting with the girls. He looked like he hadn't slept a minute. He didn't sit down. He pulled a checkbook from his pocket and laid a slip of paper on the table. "This is $5 million, Kangdae said. His voice was cold, his face a mask of granite. "Take your daughter and leave. Move to another country. Never look back." Seo-yoon looked at the check. The numbers were staggering, more money than she could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. The girls stopped eating, their spoons hovering over their bowls. Minna looked at her father with a confused, hurt expression. Seo-yoon didn't touch the check. She looked up at Kangdae, her eyes narrowing. "Is this how you do things? You find a problem, and you throw money at it until it goes away?" "It's not a problem," Kangdae said, his jaw tightening. "It's a warning. This house is not safe. My world is not safe. If you stay, you are a target. If you leave, you can have a life." Seo-yoon stood up slowly. She picked up the check. For a second, Kangdae felt a sense of relief, a cold satisfaction that he had handled it. Then, Seo-yoon ripped the check in half. She ripped it again and again until the pieces fell like snow onto the expensive rug. "You have a fortress, Kangdae," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You have guards and cameras and millions of dollars. But you have no family. You are so scared of the truth that you'd rather pay me to disappear than look at your own children. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Seo-yoon stepped toward him, her head held high. "I'm not leaving. I'm staying until I find out why our daughters have the same face. I'm staying until I find out who started that fire. You can't buy me, and you can't scare me. I am the mother of your daughter, whether you want to believe it or not." Kangdae looked at her, his breath catching. For the first time in his life, he felt small. He looked at the torn pieces of money on the floor. He had tried to buy her silence, but she had just bought his respect. "Fine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You stay. But if anything happens, it's on your head." "No," Seo-yoon said, her eyes burning into his. "It's on yours." Seo-yoon didn't just stay, she took over. Within 3 days, the sterile, cold atmosphere of the Kang estate began to crack. She didn't like the heavy velvet curtains, so she pulled them back to let the light in. She didn't like the way the staff moved like robots, so she started talking to them, asking about their families. She moved the girls' beds into the same room, filling the space with mismatched toys and the sound of laughter. Condé watched it all from the shadows. He felt like an intruder in his own home. He would walk into the living room and find Seo Yoon sitting on the floor, teaching the girls how to make paper cranes. The room was full of color and noise, things he had banned for 7 years. "This is a security risk," he said one evening, standing in the doorway. He was looking at a pile of blankets the girls had turned into a fort. Seo Yoon didn't look up from her paper crane. "It's a living room, Condé. People are supposed to live in it. There are protocols," he said, his voice losing its edge. "Your protocols make people miserable," Seo Yoon said. She stood up and walked over to him. She didn't stop until she was inches away. She reached out and straightened his tie. Her fingers were warm, and for a second Condé forgot how to breathe. "You own the house, but I own the atmosphere. If you want to live in a tomb, go back to your office. But as long as my daughter is here, this house will be a home." Condé looked down at her. He could see the gold flecks in her eyes. He could see the way her pulse jumped in her neck. He wanted to push her away, to re-establish the king of silence, but he couldn't move. He felt a strange, terrifying pull toward her warmth. "You are a dangerous woman, Seo Yoon," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just a mother. And you're just a man who forgot how to be a father." She turned and went back to the girls, leaving Condé standing in the middle of the room. He looked at his sterile, expensive life and realized she was right. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, but he had accidentally trapped himself in the dark. From the corner of the room, Madame Mo watched them through a crack in the door. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She saw the way Condé looked at Seo Yoon. She saw the way the house was changing. She realized that her curated family was falling apart, and she knew she had to act before the fire she started finally burned her down. The library of the Kong estate was a room of dark wood and the smell of old leather. Condé sat at a large table, a single lamp illuminating a stack of files. These were the closed files from 7 years ago. The police reports. The fire marshal's notes. He stared at a photo of the hospital ruins. It was a blackened skeleton of a building. He remembered standing there in the rain, his lungs burning from the smoke, watching them carry out the stretchers. They had told him his wife and one of the twins were gone. He had been so broken he hadn't asked for proof. He had just accepted the pain. "I remember the heat," a voice said from the doorway. Condé looked up. Seo Yoon was standing there, her arms crossed. She walked into the room, her eyes fixed on the photos. "I remember the sound of the glass breaking," she said softly. She sat down across from him. "And I remember a woman's voice. She told me to run. She told me the man who did this was coming back to finish the job." "Who?" Condé asked, his voice a low throb. "Who did she say I was?" "She didn't use your name," Seo Yoon said. "She just said the monster. She said you wanted the children for their bloodline, but you didn't want the mother. She said you set the fire to start fresh." Condé felt a surge of rage so pure it made his hands shake. "I loved my wife. I waited for those children like they were the air I needed to breathe. I didn't even have a rival clan back then that would do such a thing. I was a man who wanted a family, not a syndicate." He pushed a file toward her. It was a list of the lockets he had commissioned. 2 identical silver butterflies. "The jeweler told me the lockets were destroyed in the fire," Condé said. "He said he saw them melt. But here they are. One was with Minna when Madame O found her in the garden. And one was with you." "Madame O found her?" Seo Yoon's brow furrowed. "I thought the nurses saved her." "No," Condé said, his eyes darkening. "Madame O told me she arrived just as the building collapsed. She said she saw a nurse hand Minna over and then run back into the flames. I believed her for 7 years." He looked at the photo of the hospital again. He realized that Madame O had been the architect of his grief. She hadn't just saved his daughter, she had stolen his life. Seo Yoon closed her eyes, her face tight with the effort of remembering. It was cold, she whispered. Even with the fire, I remember the cold. I was lying on the grass outside the hospital. I couldn't feel my legs. Everything was white and gray. A woman in a grey hanbok was standing over me. Kangdae leaned forward. Madame O? She had a mask on, but I remember her eyes, Seo-yoon said. She opened her eyes, and they were full of terror. She was holding a baby. My baby. I tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. She looked at me like I was a piece of trash. She said, "One is enough for the Kong name. The other is a mistake." Kangdae's breath itched. She was going to leave you there? She was going to leave us both, Seo-yoon said. But then a siren sounded. She panicked. She dropped the baby near me and ran toward a car. I crawled to her, to Star. I grabbed her and I ran. I don't know how far I went. I just remember waking up in a different hospital 2 days later with no memory and a baby who wouldn't stop crying. Kangdae reached across the table. His hand hovered near hers, then pulled back. The King of Silence had no words for this kind of horror. He had lived in the same house with the woman who had tried to discard half his family. She told me you were dead, Kangdae said, his voice cracking. She said she tried to find the other twin, but the room had already collapsed. She wept in my arms, Seo-yoon. She wept like a mother. She's not a mother, Seo-yoon said, her voice turning to ice. She's a curator. She wanted to build a version of you she could control. And a wife and 2 children were too much sentimentality for her plans. Suddenly, the library door creaked. They both turned. The hallway was empty, but a shadow moved quickly past the light. Kangdae stood up, his hand reaching for the concealed weapon under the table. She knows we're talking. Let her know, Seo-yoon said, standing up beside him. Her hand brushed his, and for a split second, they both froze. Either of them moved. The electricity between them was a physical thing, a spark in the dark. I'm done being afraid of shadows. I will protect you, Kangdae whispered. No, Seo-yoon said, her eyes meeting his. We will protect them. The next day, the estate felt like a ticking bomb. Kangdae spent the morning in the kitchen, a place he hadn't entered in a decade. He stood in the corner, a cup of bitter coffee in his hand, watching Seo-yoon. She was making jollof rice for the girls, a recipe she said she learned from a neighbor in her old apartment building. She moved with an easy, rhythmic grace, chopping onions and stirring a large pot. The girls were sitting at the breakfast bar, their identical faces lit up with excitement. It smells like home, Minna said, her eyes bright. It smells like spices, Star said, nodding. Mama makes it the best. Kangdae watched Seo-yoon. As she stirred the pot, she reached up and absent-mindedly rubbed her left ear. It was a small, quick movement. A second later, both Minna and Star did the exact same thing. All 3 of them rubbed their ears at the same time, unaware they were doing it. Kangdae felt a lump in his throat. It was the ear touch habit. He remembered his wife doing that when she was concentrating. It was a genetic signature, a truth that no DNA test could hide. He saw the 3 of them, the mother and her daughters, and he felt a surge of love so fierce it terrified him. Seo-yoon looked up and caught him staring. She didn't look away. A faint blush crept up her cheeks, and she turned back to the pot, her movements becoming a little more hurried. Would you like to try some? She asked, her voice a bit unsteady. Kangdae walked over to the counter. He stood close to her, close enough to see the steam from the pot reflecting in her eyes. I haven't eaten home-cooked food in 7 years. Then it's about time, she said. She scooped a small spoonful of the rice and blew on it, then held it out to him. It was an intimate gesture, something a wife would do for a husband. Kangdae hesitated, then leaned in and took the bite. The flavors were bold and warm, a contrast to the bland, expensive meals he usually ate. It's perfect, he whispered. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to vibrate. For a moment, the Mafia boss and the street vendor disappeared. There was only a man and a woman in a sunlit kitchen. Condé reached out, his hand moving as if on its own. He wanted to touch the stray lock of hair that had fallen over Seo-yoon's face. His fingers brushed her temple, and she flinches, not in fear, but in surprise. The touch was electric. Condé froze, his hand still hovering in the air. He saw the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, the way her breath hitched. He realized he was becoming sentimental, the very thing Madame O had warned him against. He realized he was falling for a ghost. He snapped his hand back, his face turning back to stone. "Don't mistake my curiosity for care," he said, his voice harsh and cold. Seo-yoon stepped back, her expression tightening. The warmth in the kitchen evaporated instantly. "Curiosity? Is that what you call it?" "I am a man of business, Seo-yoon," Condé said, his jaw tightening. "I am investigating a security breach in my past. That is all this is." "You are a liar, Condé," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You are scared to death that you might actually feel something. You'd rather hide behind your business than admit that you missed us." "I have a syndicate to run," he growled. "I don't have time for your emotional outbursts." "Then go run it," she said, pointing to the door. "Go sit in your dark office and count your money. But don't you dare touch me again unless you mean it." Condé turned on his heel and walked out, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt like he was losing control of his world, and he hated it. He hated her for making him feel, and he hated himself for wanting more. He retreated to his office, slamming the door. He sat at his desk, but he couldn't work. All he could see was her face in the steam. All he could feel was the warmth of her skin. He looked at the security monitors. He saw Madame O standing in the hallway, watching the kitchen door. She looked satisfied. She had seen the pullback. She knew that Condé was still trying to be the man she had built. An hour later, the house was quiet. The girls were in the garden, and Seo-yoon was in the east wing. Condé walked into the playroom, a room he usually avoided because it was too full of sentimentality. He stopped at the small art table. There was a piece of paper lying there, covered in bright crayon marks. He picked it up. It was a drawing of a butterfly. But it wasn't a normal butterfly. It had one body and two sets of wings, one pink, one yellow. Underneath, in messy, 7-year-old handwriting, were the names Minna and Star. And in the middle, a heart with the word Mama inside. Condé felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked at the drawing, and for the first time, he let himself see the truth. This wasn't just a security breach. This was his life. This was the family he had mourned for 7 years. He realized that by trying to protect himself from the pain, he had been killing the very thing that made him human. He had been a king of a graveyard. "They made that for you," a soft voice said. He turned. Seo-yoon was standing in the doorway. She didn't look angry anymore, she looked sad. "They want to believe you're the hero, Condé," she said. "They don't see the Mafia boss. They just see their dad." Condé looked at the drawing, then at her. "I don't know how to be a hero, Seo-yoon. I only know how to be a weapon. A weapon can also be a shield," she said, walking over to him. She didn't touch him, but she stood close enough that he could feel her warmth. "You can't kill your feelings without killing your soul. And if you do that, you've already let Madame O win." Condé looked into her eyes, and he saw a strength that was greater than any syndicate. He realized that she was the one who was truly powerful. "I won't let her win," he whispered. "Then prove it," she said. He reached out and took her hand. This time, she didn't flinch. She squeezed back. In that quiet room, surrounded by crayons and toys, the King of Silence made a silent vow. He would burn his world to the ground if it meant keeping her safe. But even as they stood there, a bell rang. It was the front gate. Madame O was returning with a man in a white lab coat. The DNA results were in. The Golden Room was the most formal space in the estate, filled with gilded furniture and cold, white light. Condé sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of iron. Seo-yoon sat to his left, her hand clutched in her lap. Madame Mo stood at the opposite end, flanked by a doctor in a sharp white coat. "The results are here, Condé," Madame Mo said. Her voice was calm, almost pitying. "I know you wanted a miracle. We all did." The doctor stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Condé didn't touch it. He looked at Madame O, searching for a crack in her mask, but she was perfect. "Read it," Condé said. The doctor opened the envelope and cleared his throat. "The genetic comparison between Minna and Star shows a 0% match. They are not related." Silence fell over the room. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Seo-yoon let out a small, broken gasp. Her face went deathly pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Look at them. They have the same face. They have the same habit. How can you say they aren't related?" "Data doesn't lie, dear," Madame O said, her voice smooth as oil. "As I suspected, this woman is a plant from a rival clan. They used plastic surgery on the child to create a duplicate. It's a common tactic to infiltrate powerful families." "You're lying!" Seo-yoon stood up, her chair screeching on the floor. "I've had my daughter since she was a baby. I woke up with her in the ruins. You were there. I was there to save Minna," Madame O said, her eyes turning cold. "I never saw you. I never saw another child. You are a grifter, and you've manipulated Condé's grief to get into this house." Madame O turned to Condé. "She is a security threat, Condé. You must remove her before the board finds out you've let a spy into the inner sanctum. For the sake of the syndicate, you must choose logic over sentiment." Condé looked at the paper. The numbers were there. The scientific stamps were there. He looked at Seo-yoon, who was shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. He felt a deep, biting cold in his chest. Everything in his world was built on data, on proof, on logic. If the DNA was negative, then his world was a lie. "Condé," Seo-yoon whispered, her eyes searching his. "Look at me. You know the truth. You felt it." Condé didn't look at her. He looked at the DNA report. He thought of the syndicate, the board members who were already calling for his head. He thought of the King of Silence he was supposed to be. "The data is clear," Condé said. His voice was a flat, dead thing. "What?" Seo-yoon's voice broke. "I cannot have a security risk in this house," Condé said, standing up. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were like black glass, empty and cold. "I will have my men escort you and the girl to a hotel. I will pay for your living expenses for a year, but you are never to contact Minna again. You're choosing this?" Seo-yoon stepped back, her face a mask of horror. "You're choosing a piece of paper over your own blood." "I am choosing the syndicate," Condé said. "Then you are a coward," she spat. "You're so scared of being weak that you'd rather be a monster. Fine. Take your house. Take your money. But you'll never see us again." She turned and ran from the room. A few minutes later, the sound of the girls screaming echoed through the hallways. "No! Star! Don't go!" Minna cried. "Mama! I want to stay with Minna!" Star wailed. The girls were torn apart by the guards. Star was carried to a car, her small hands beating against the window. Minna was held back, her face red with tears. Condé stood at the window of the Golden Room, watching the car speed away. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He felt like he was made of stone. Madame O stepped up behind him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, Condé. You saved the family name. The board will be pleased." Condé didn't respond. He watched the tail lights of the car disappear. He had his logic back. He had his control back. But as he looked at his reflection in the glass, he didn't see a king. He saw a man who had just buried his family for the second time. The Khan estate returned to its original state, a tomb. The color Seo Yoon had brought was gone. The bright drawings were folded and hidden in a drawer. The butterfly fort had been disassembled and the blankets put back into storage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Condé sat at the massive dining table alone. A servant placed a plate of perfectly cooked, bland steak in front of him. He picked up his knife and fork, the silver clinking loudly against the china. He took a bite, but it tasted like ash. He looked at the empty chair across from him. He remembered the smell of the jollof rice. He remembered the sound of the girls laughing over their plates. He remembered the way Seo Yoon would lean in and whisper a joke to Star. Now, there was nothing. He ate in silence. He worked in silence. He slept in silence. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was a weight that pressed against his chest until he couldn't breathe. He realized that the perfect house he had worked so hard to maintain was actually a graveyard. He walked through the garden at night. The fountain was running, the water splashing rhythmically. He stopped at the bench where Seo Yoon had sat. He sat down and closed his eyes. He tried to imagine her there, but the memory was fading, replaced by the cold logic of the DNA report. He felt a deep, biting regret. He had chosen his throne over his heart, and now he was the king of nothing. He had won the war for the syndicate, but he had lost the war for himself. He looked up at the stars. They were cold and distant, just like him. He realized that he would spend the rest of his life in this silence, and for the first time in his life, the king of silence was afraid. The next morning, Condé walked into Minna's room. She was sitting on her bed, staring out the window. She didn't turn when he entered. She looked thin and pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Minna," he said softly, "it's time for your lessons." "I don't want lessons," she said, her voice flat. "I want Star." "We talked about this," Condé said, his heart aching. "The test showed." "I don't care about the test." Minna spun around, her face full of a raw, adult anger. "She has my face, Daddy. She has my locket. She rubs her ear when she's sad, just like me. Why don't you believe me?" Condé had no answer. He looked at the floor. His eyes caught something shiny near the baseboard. He walked over and picked it up. It was Minna's butterfly locket. But it was broken. The hinge had snapped, and one of the silver wings was missing. It looked like it had been crushed by a heavy foot. "You broke it," Minna whispered. I didn't," Condé said, confused. "Madame said you did," Minna said, her voice trembling. "She said you were angry that the scam had worked on you. She said you never wanted a twin, and you never wanted that woman." Condé felt a surge of cold fury. He looked at the broken locket. He remembered the ear touch habit. He remembered the way Madame O had smiled when the DNA result was read. He walked out of the room, the broken silver wing digging into his palm. He went straight to the trash bin in Madame O's private office. He had never snooped before. He was a man of honor, but honor had just cost him his family. He tipped the bin over. Papers, receipts, and a shredded document fell out. He knelt on the floor and began to piece the shreds together. His breath hitched as the words formed. It was a letter from a private laboratory, not the one the doctor had come from. It was dated 3 days ago. Results for Sample A and Sample B, 99.9% match. Identical twins. Underneath the letter was a receipt for a service of fabrication, paid to a local doctor. The payer was Madame O. Condé stood in the middle of the office, the shredded truth clutched in his hands. He felt a roar of rage in his ears like a tidal wave. Everything was a lie. The DNA test wasn't a mistake, it was a murder. Madame O hadn't just faked a result, she had tried to kill the memory of his family to keep him under her thumb. She hadn't saved his daughter 7 years ago, she had curated a tragedy to ensure he would never have a sentimentality, to distract him from the syndicate. He reinterpreted everything. The hospital fire wasn't a rival attack. It was a kidnapping. Madame O had set the fire herself to prune his life. She had decided that one heir was enough, and a wife was too much of a risk to the Kang bloodline. He felt a wave of nausea. He had lived in the same house with a woman who had tried to discard half his family like trash. He had let her whisper poison into his ear for 7 years. He ran to the security monitors. He checked the location of his private cleaners. They were usually used for rival gang business, but he saw a work order in the system that he hadn't approved. Target: Seoyun. Location: Old Market Shop. Objective: final clearance. No, Kangdae whispered. Madame O wasn't just sending them away, she was cleaning the evidence. She was going to finish what she started 7 years ago. Kangdae didn't call the police. He didn't call his guards. He knew he couldn't trust anyone in this house. He grabbed his keys and ran to the garage. He took the fastest car he owned, the engine roaring like a beast as he tore through the iron gates. He had 10 minutes to reach the market. He had 10 minutes to save the woman he had just thrown away. As he sped through the streets of Seoul, his heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't think about the syndicate. He didn't think about the board. He only thought about a woman in a yellow hoodie and a girl who rubbed her ear when she was sad. The old market was a maze of narrow alleys and wooden stalls, smelling of fish and spices. Kangdae skidded to a halt at the entrance, his tires screaming. He jumped out and ran into the darkness, his eyes searching for a flash of yellow. He saw the cleaners first. 3 men in gray jackets, moving with a silent, professional precision. They were standing in front of a small, cramped shop. One of them was holding a canister of gasoline. Seoyun! Kangdae roared. The men turned. They didn't look scared, they looked confused. They worked for him, after all. Sir? The lead man asked. Madame O said you wanted this handled quietly. I am the chairman, Kangdae shouted, his voice cracking with rage. You take orders from me. Drop it! But it was too late. One of the men had already dropped a match. The wooden shop went up like paper. The flames were orange and hungry, licking at the old beams. A scream came from inside, a small, shrill scream that Kangdae knew in his marrow. Star! Kangdae didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for his men to react. He charged into the smoke, his black suit catching the sparks. He kicked in the door, the heat hitting him like a wall. Seoyun! Star! He found them in the back, huddled behind a counter. Seoyun was shielding Star with her body, her face covered in soot. She looked up at him, and for a second, her eyes were full of a raw, primal fear. Kangdae? She whispered. Get out! He shouted, grabbing her arm. The roof is coming down! He pulled them through the flames, his lungs burning. As they burst out into the alley, a beam collapsed behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Kangdae fell to his knees, gasping for air. He looked at Seoyun. She was shaking, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked at the fire, then at him. Suddenly she gasped, her hand going to her head. The fire, she whispered. I remember. Seoyun's eyes weren't focused on the present. They were looking at a ghost. It wasn't a rival, she whispered, her voice a hollow thing. It was her. Madame O. She was standing in the hospital room. She was holding a syringe. She said 1 is enough for the Kang name. Kangdae felt the world tilt. She tried to kill you herself? I fought her, Seoyun said, her voice growing stronger as the memories flooded back. I grabbed the girls and ran. But the fire, she had already started the fire. You were in the hallway, Kangdae. You were fighting the guards she sent to keep you away. You yelled at me to run. You yelled at me to save them. Kangdae felt a flash of memory, a face in the smoke, a desperate scream. Run, Seoyun. Save them. I couldn't get both of them out, Seoyun said, tears streaming through the soot on her face. The roof fell between us. She grabbed Minna and ran. I thought she was saving her. But she was stealing her. Kangdae stood up slowly. He looked at the burning shop, then at the woman he had loved and lost and found again. He felt a surge of love so powerful it felt like a physical weight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't find you." "You found us now," she said. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He didn't care about the soot, the smoke, or the men watching them. He held her like she was the only thing holding him to the earth. "We need to go," Condé said, his voice returning with a dangerous edge. "We need to go to a safe house. Madame O won't stop until we're all gone." He picked up Star, who was clinging to her mother's leg. He looked at the cleaners. They were standing back, their heads bowed. "You report back to Madame O," Condé said to them. "Tell her the job is done. Tell her there are no survivors." He led them to the car, his mind already racing. The King of Silence was gone. In his place was a man who was ready to go to war for his family. The safe house was a small, secluded cabin in the mountains, surrounded by tall pines and the sound of a rushing stream. It was a place Condé had kept secret even from Madame O. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of cedar. Condé sat Seoyun and Star on the sofa. He worked in silence, fetching a first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. He knelt in front of Seoyun, gently wiping the soot from her face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Every movement was an apology. Every touch was a vow. He moved to her neck, cleaning the jagged burn scar that had been a mystery for 7 years. He realized it wasn't just a scar, it was a mark of her courage. "I remember the lockets," Seoyun said softly. Condé stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 silver butterflies. He placed them on the low table between them. One was pristine, the other was broken, its wing missing. "They were a gift for our anniversary," Condé said. "I had them made specifically to click together." He took the broken wing he had found in the estate and placed it next to the broken locket. Then, he moved the 2 butterflies toward each other. With a soft click, the 2 lockets snapped together. The magnets inside were still strong after 7 years. Together, they formed a single, perfect crest, a butterfly with 4 wings, representing the 4 of them. Star leaned forward, her eyes wide. "They match." "They always did," Condé said. He looked at Seoyun. In the dim light of the cabin, she looked like the woman he had married in secret all those years ago. He realized that Madame O had tried to steal their history, but she couldn't steal the truth. "I'm going back tomorrow," Condé said, his voice turning to steel. "I'm going to end this." "We're going back," Seoyun said, her eyes meeting his. "I'm not letting you face her alone." Condé looked at her, and he saw a strength that was greater than any syndicate. He realized that she was the one who was truly powerful. "Fine," he said. "We go together." The next morning, the Kong estate was as silent as a tomb. Madame O stood in the center of the golden room, looking at the black-suited board members. "Condé has had an accident," she said, her voice full of fake sorrow. "The pressure of the recent scandals was too much. As Chief of Staff, I will oversee the transition of the syndicate to the next of kin." The board members nodded, their faces masks of greed. They didn't care about Condé, they only cared about the money. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors burst open. Condé walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a black jacket, his face smudged with ash. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and liked it. Behind him was Seoyun, holding Star's hand. Madame O's face went deathly pale. She stumbled back, her hand clutching the table. "Condé? You were supposed to be dead?" Condé said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He walked to the head of the table. The board members scrambled to their feet, their eyes wide with shock. Condé didn't look at them. He looked at Madame O. Then the King of Silence did something that no one expected. He dropped to his knees. He didn't kneel to the board. He didn't kneel to the syndicate. He knelt in front of Seoyun. "I am the monster she told you I was," Condé said, his voice cracking with emotion. I let myself be built by a lie. I let myself believe that power was better than love. I lived in this house for 7 years while you were suffering, and for that, I am not worthy to be your husband." The room was silent. The board members looked at each other in confusion. The powerful Mafia boss was begging for forgiveness from a woman in a yellow hoodie. "But I am asking you to lead me," Conde said, looking up at her. "I am asking you to be the heart of this family. I don't want the syndicate. I don't want the throne. I only want you." Seo-yoon looked down at him. She saw the man she had loved, the man who had been buried under years of ice. She reached out and touched his face. "Stand up, Conde," she said softly. "The king is dead. Let the father live." She pulled him up, and for a second, the power dynamic of the entire Kang Empire shifted. The billionaire was no longer in control, the mother was. Madame O let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. "You think this is a fairy tale? You think the board will follow a man who kneels to a beggar? You're finished, Conde." "No," Conde said, turning to her with a cold, terrifying smile. "I'm just getting started." "Guards!" Madame O screamed. "Remove these intruders!" But the guards didn't move. They stood against the walls, their heads bowed. They had seen the DNA report Conde had leaked to the entire security team 10 minutes before he walked in. They knew the truth. "You're alone, Madame O," Conde said. "Am I?" Madame O's face twisted into a mask of pure evil. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small remote. "I knew you were weak, Conde. I always knew it. That's why I took precautions." She pressed a button. A screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the East Wing nursery. Minna was there, but she wasn't alone. 2 men in masks were standing over her bed. "If I don't enter a code into this remote every 10 minutes, Madame O said, her voice shaking with rage, "the nursery is flooded with gas. You have 9 minutes left, Conde. Choose. The girls stay and die, or you sign over the syndicate to me and I let them go." Conde felt a surge of cold terror. He looked at the screen. Minna was sleeping, unaware of the danger. He looked at the clock on the wall. "You would kill a child you raised?" Seo-yoon whispered, her voice full of horror. "I raised an heir," Madame O spat. "And if the heir is tainted by your blood, she is useless to me. I would rather the Khan name end than see it dragged through the mud by people like you." Conde felt the roar of rage in his ears. He looked at the board members. They were looking at their feet, too scared to act. He realized that his empire was built on fear, and fear was a fragile thing. 9 minutes, Conde, Madame O said, her finger hovering over the button. "What is it going to be? Your power or your heart?" Conde looked at Seo-yoon. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw a fierce, unwavering trust. He realized that he didn't need the syndicate to save his daughter. He only needed to be a father. "Fine," Conde said, his voice turning to ice. "You want the syndicate? Take it." Conde walked to the table. He picked up the heavy, leather-bound volume of the syndicate charter, the book that contained all the names, the bank accounts, and the legal structures of the Kang Empire. Madame O's eyes lit up with greed. "Sign the transfer. Now." Conde looked at the book. This was his life's work. This was the source of his King of Silence persona. He looked at the clock. 8 minutes. He took a lighter from his pocket. He didn't sign the paper. He lit the corner of the charter. "What are you doing?" Madame O shrieked. "I am no longer your king," Conde said, his voice a low, powerful growl. The book caught fire, the old pages curling and blackening. Conde tossed it onto the center of the table. The board members scrambled back as the flames grew. "Without this book, the syndicate is nothing," Conde said. "The bank accounts are locked. The names are gone. You have nothing to inherit, Madame O. You have nothing to rule. You're insane." Madame O lunged for the burning book, but Conde stepped in her path. "I am a father," he said. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. The doors to the nursery on the screen were kicked in. A team of men, not syndicate guards but the cleaners, who had turned on Madame O, burst in and grabbed the masked men. Minna was snatched up and carried out of the room. "The gas line is cut, sir!" a voice yelled through the speakers. Condé looked at Madame O. Her face was a mask of pure, shattered disbelief. She looked at the remote, then at the burning charter. She realized that she had lost everything. "I gave you everything!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I made you a king!" "You made me a ghost," Condé said. "And now, I'm coming back to life." He turned to his men. "Take her away. I don't want to see her face again." As Madame O was dragged from the room, she was no longer a queen. She was just a broken old woman, shouting into the silence. Condé turned to Seoyun. He didn't wait. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt the weight lift from his chest. "It's over," he whispered. "No," she said, looking up at him. "It's finally beginning." The beach was a stretch of white sand and the endless, blue-green hum of the ocean. The sun was high and warm, a contrast to the gray, cold mornings of Seoul. Condé sat on a driftwood log, wearing a simple linen shirt and shorts. He looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened by the light. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't checking his phone. He was just watching. A few yards away, Minna and Star were running through the surf. They were wearing identical yellow swimsuits, their laughter ringing out over the sound of the waves. They found a shell, then a piece of sea glass, their small heads bent together in wonder. Suddenly, a real butterfly, a bright, orange and black monarch, fluttered down and landed on Star's shoulder. "Minna! Look!" Star whispered, standing perfectly still. Minna leaned in, her eyes wide. "It's a real one! It's not silver!" The butterfly stayed for a long moment, its wings opening and closing in the sun. Then, with a soft flutter, it took off, heading out toward the sea. The girls chased after it, their feet splashing in the shallow water. Seoyun walked over and sat down beside Condé. She looked at him, and she saw the man he had become. "They're happy," she said. "We're happy," Condé corrected her. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, and this time, there was no pullback. There was only a deep, quiet certainty. He looked at her, and he saw the woman who had walked through fire to save half of his soul. He saw the woman who had dared to tell the King of Silence to be quiet. "Minna was right," Condé said, his voice soft but clear. "About what?" Seoyun asked. "About the girl with her face," he said. He leaned in and kissed her temple, near the scar. "She has your face, Seoyun, and you've always had my heart." Seoyun smiled, and it was a smile that could light up 1,000 estates. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and together, they watched their daughters play. The Kong Syndicate was gone. The fortress was sold. The King of Silence was just a memory. In their place was a family, whole and real, standing in the sun. The secret that their parents never expected was simple, that love was more powerful than any empire, and that the truth, no matter how deep it was buried, always finds its way back to the light.
If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in his place? Chosen power, or family?